Uh, Thank you. We're very pleased to be here today. My name is Eldon Sprickerhoff. I'm the founder and chief innovation officer at eSentire. So eSentire is a managed detection and response firm. We used to call it embedded incident response or collaborative threat management. Then Gartner decided that they could make a whole new category out of it, and because they'd come to see us and said, well, we'll never compete with what are MSSPs because we're doing this sort of embedded, kill the traffic, the response through the response perspective. We're about just under 500 employees right now. There's about 150 people in our SOCs. What has been interesting is I've been attending a lot of the talks, especially in this track, and it's great because I've got a better feeling as to where people are using the Sumo Logic with respect to security. So the previous speakers from Pokemon building up a SOC, we have just under 1,000 clients, and what we're doing is we're building up Sumo Logic's capabilities very specific to what they want, but we're still doing it from a managed perspective. So I want to give some context into how we're doing this. And so there's a phrase that I like to use with respect to last generation SIEMs, and we start off, as a company, we start off with a lot of visibility. So I like to get deep visibility into networks, like on the endpoint, extend that out. One of the things I often say about last gen SIEM is, they're where logs go to die. I've seen so many implementations. I've started eSentire just about 18 years ago, gone to a lot of different places and seen how they've implemented SIEMs. And so much of it is let's just throw logs at it. We'll never do anything with it. No, there have been cases that I've gone into firms and they've had a huge implementation of SIEM, and I've asked, can I log in? No, and they couldn't even give me the credentials because the person that had set it up had left. And nevertheless, this was part of this was frighteningly, they need to be PCI compliant as well. So they were able to do the check mark for SIEM. So in any case, there are three big strategies I like to keep in mind when we're talking to our clients as to how we want to build up and how we can best use the logging sources and SIEM implementations. And so we need full ecosystem visibility. And as to the last two talks, admitting that tools and tech are not enough. We like to have scalability within our SOC. I like to look at things that let tech do as much of the heavy lifting as possible, and let people do what they're really great at. There's a team that reports up into me that build ML models, and we're integrating pieces into that with Sumo as well. And the last piece is that the response piece is very important to us. And this has been how the company is built. And so everything that we do when we're building log sources and doing run books, it is that we can do mitigation and very timely response. So there's three big pieces that come out when we're thinking about when we're talking to our clients as to why we're putting this piece of software or service into place. And first and foremost for us is the threat detection piece. We recognize, it's been 18 years in eSentire. I've been doing this for just under 30 years. It's a whole new world. The attacks we see now are just incredible compared to even 5 years ago. And from the keynote yesterday, when you're seeing the modern architectures that's coming out, it's so difficult to get better visibility. And like I said, we want deep visibility that we can do deep digs, that we can make excellent decisions as to how we're going to thwart the attack or stop it going forward. There we go. So the second piece, we have a lot of firms in financial industries and in healthcare. Regulatory stress is huge on them. We're here in California, the hotbed for cutting edge or leading edge on privacy, both in enterprise and for personal. We have, but it's not just California. We have clients that are in the EU, dealing with all these different increasing cost of compliance, and having a very small runway as to how do you deal with how do you deal with keeping the amount of data that is appropriate to do investigations and not run afoul of any compliance regulations. Hold on. And the third piece, again, is this transformational concern. I've been thinking about how the struggle for security has changed. And there's two pieces that I think about here. So this sort of left brain, right brain. So pretty much everybody still has some kind of on-prem, piece, hardware systems. And, I like to think that the universe tends towards entropy. And so we have this supposed sort of security scale, and every day, every hour, you can think of it sort of degrading on a very regular basis. And if it didn't degrade, Microsoft wouldn't have to patch every, bundle. So we have this one side of the brain, which is, embedded, current infrastructure that is slowly, decaying down until patches or, other infrastructure is implemented to bring it back up. And the other side, we have all this sexy cloud infrastructure and services that are being implemented. And what I've found is much of the time the people who are implementing these new services haven't considered how that's going to sit in with your current compliance piece. I've seen cases where a firm came to us, they were using O365. During an analysis, they discovered that someone had gained external access to admin access to their implementation. They didn't have 2FA enabled. They went to do logs, to check at the logs to see how long this person had, to try to get an idea how long they'd been in there. They only had logs going back a month. That was the price of the package that they had purchased. And so we never discovered whether it was the CTO who basically said, look, I need a year's worth of logs, and for their regulatory regime, they did need at least a year's worth of logs. Or was it purchasing that went for the cheapest piece? So this is a perfect example of, just because you've got, don't understand that's necessarily the shared security model, and along with everything else that you still have, you have these new gaps that get introduced. And so, listen, as a pure security services firm, when we're looking for a way to, be the most flexible piece of infrastructure to bring in as that plumbing, loved Sumo. And the biggest reasons for this were, personally, I like the fact that it was first and foremost a data analytics company that gives you the tools, like that plumbing. I did not want to build that plumbing myself. That would let us do with manipulation, do very rapid analysis. I love the fact that everyone that was doing the analysis, doing the testing, didn't have to crack a manual. So when we're talking about our clients who may want access to it as well, don't have to put it into go through a rigorous training session to be able to get into building dashboards and so on. There we go. So there's a report called the Black Report, and if you're interested in security, I recommend you take a look. So there's an analyst firm that went through and took a look at, asked penetration testers, auditors, and so on, say, I want to ask you a bunch of questions. Like, so what percentage how many of you think you can get into any environment given a week? What percent of you think you can exfiltrate under 15 hours? One of the things that I thought was interesting about this was they asked, what are the pieces of what are the implementation pieces that the infrastructure or services that do the best job of stopping you? And when you put when you put up the results from this, the things that we say are core to security, right? Like whatever antivirus or firewalls or tweaking the toolkit from Microsoft. This was single-digit efficacy. You know what is not on this list? SIEM. So that is another thing that you take that should be front and center when you're talking about what you're trying to get out of your SIEM. Don't try to shoehorn it into existing capabilities from a defense perspective. But what can you do? I think part of the problem is identifying what was wrong with the last generation, and the things for us that hit hard were things that we need to have network traffic wherever it's possible. It's like AWS came out with the virtual tap. Microsoft kind of released one. It's kind of in beta. They're having some problems with it right now, but there's that need for that kind of visibility. And the things that we really wanted, and it was nice to see again from the last day and a half with respect to the database, the security components that are being rolled out, that are in beta right now. How can we prioritize threats better? How can we correlate all these different data streams? And for these reasons that we chose Sumo Logic, and we're having great experience with it right now. The biggest piece again is the response on our side. So I walked through a sort of a sample investigation. So dictionary attack across AWS. There's thresholds. We have runbooks that run on a regular basis. There's a sort of a SOAR-like capability that we've built out. I'm hoping that with the new pieces that come out with Sumo with respect to the SIEM capability helps to sit well with our investigative tools. The SOC does a deep dive, pulls up pulls up the data, does the geolocation that's within Sumo itself, do a back analysis on what the specific user sends an alert out. Now, from the alert side, we have a certain amount of time, depending on what the attack that's going on, and as our framework with the client that says, if we don't get a message back in 10 minutes, we're going to do an escalation procedure. So in this case, I think it was skipped and went for a complete reset. They did another deep dive into it, opened a ticket to bring this out. Then they do the pivot back in just to take a look at the 24-hour and then the 30 days with respect to digging into what was going on here. Is there something else? Like, what was this person doing when they did gain access? And in this case, they created an evil user. You think they'd and when they're digging into it again, realize that there's no they did not log into it, but nevertheless this should be disabled. And it goes back to this framework, and I call this the pragmatic security event management. And I can make this available as well. What it basically said, for us there's sort of 12 or 13 core bad things that happen from a security perspective, and what you'll need is to have a playbook that's written out that when you're in the fog of war, you know what to handle. If you're let's say your infrastructure manager or your CTO, depending on how big you are, if this would be the person in charge of dealing with an incident, if they're on a plane to Hong Kong and they're out of contact for the next 10 plus hours, you want someone else to be able to run through this. And so when we're going through, it's probably not so great on the back there, but so much of it has to do with having excellent handling processes. Can I follow this the next time a different client or a person gets hit? Can we follow the same process? And that's being built in. It's nice to see that we'll be able to pull more of these pieces and put them actually into the Sumo, the new pieces that's in beta right now. On the remediation side, this is where, again, that extra little piece of pivot is. I like to pivot between the network pieces. I like to pivot on the endpoint, and the logging piece is basically filling in everything else that I can't necessarily get with the existing tool set. And so there's a remediation piece, and this will go out across either a specific client or across an entire umbrella of clients. Like we like to see, because we have full visibility, we can do deep investigations on attacks. We're able to do analysis and to do either kills of IPs or we fold different signatures into the threat intel databases that go back and forth. This is a case of the remediation piece, and so this is a blacklist nominations that we put forward. So SOC analysts, when they're doing investigations, they can nominate different things for blacklists to be put in umbrella blacklists, and we're in talks to, build to, to figure out how can we share this better. You can see that each one of these bars is a single day. That's why Q3 is a little fatter. You know, it's there are days that there are multiple thousand of bad known things that are to be blocked immediately. The other thing, so you know, when we're talking to our clients, and some of them have been burned by SIEM implementations before, and so I say, you know, when we're talking about them, we want to say what is the most judicious choice, and you know, where do you start? And you know, we come purely from a security perspective, but it's important, even as the previous speakers were saying, that it's important to get a broader business context. I mean, and there's a cost, and not necessarily a cost from how much I'm going to have to pay to ingest, but what's the cost for people to investigate or do work with this? Does it make sense? You know, do log sources compete for attention? How do you expect this to creep from time to time? And there are, you know, operational maintenance pieces that you have to worry about as well. And then you say, how do you value new sources? And there's stock ones. You know, from a security perspective, of course, I'd like to have, identity management is the head of the snake. Everything follows behind it. What log sources are most important for alerts or triage? Is there other context data that I can use when I'm doing investigations? One of the other things is I've seen cases where there's certain cloud service providers with identity, when dealing with log identity, you don't necessarily get immediate logs that are sent. It may take 20 minutes, may take half an hour, may take 45 minutes, and it's getting better. You have to think about this when you're doing investigations, and you have to say, I may be getting data afterwards. With respect to that OODA loop, I may have to make decisions and have incomplete information. What can I do to help avoid that, making the bad mistakes given on incomplete information? That will still keep coming in. There's questions about the data volume. The last piece here, and it's something to think about, and that is, after, say, a quarter of running with certain log forces, you should be able to say, okay, how valuable were those sources? Were they not useful at all? Is there a way to take away one source and have other sources that can pick up that slack? So it really has to do with, I say, making judicious choices. And when we were looking to build this out, so there's sort of four big pillars that we want to use to stand on with respect to why are we doing this in the first place. And the first piece comes into, we're calling it business-aware security. And this, again, we're so focused on looking at security pieces that we're not necessarily asking other people in the organization what might be useful for them. So there's more of a push once you've got your security concerns well in hand, to be able to talk to business process. And this gives you a sense as to where things might break down. When you're going through an incident response scenario, this helps to get a sense as to, if a system gets broken, what are the business processes that support it? Where does that flow? What do we have to try to fix as soon as possible? And that's where this context is incredibly important. Most tech, especially security people, are not going to necessarily know how the business flow operates within any firm. You have to pull in people from your business unit that can speak to it. Second piece is evidence extraction, and this has to do with if you had to build a case for HR or for law enforcement, do you have the appropriate sources in place? Do you understand how to tie them together? Do you understand what handling rules you have? So to protect chain of custody, do you have a process in place? Do you have sufficient logs to be able to handle that? The hottest one, of course, for us is the real-time evaluation of suspicious activity. And that has to do, of course, with instant response. How do we get into there very quickly, recognizing that data may be coming in late at different time deltas, and what ways can we use, as we could see, to do blocking, to do pivoting between different systems. The last one has to do with situational awareness. And this is, again, where we're doing different pivoting. It's not necessarily to where we're looking for an attack in the immediate. this is a case where we're looking at pulling data out, running ML models and so on, and seeing if there's other things that we didn't, is there other things that we did not necessarily see or that we didn't know that we need to see at that time. So those are the 4 pillars that we are based our pieces on when we're talking to our clients as to how we're going to implement Sumo into their environment. We have time for questions. Also, I have the booth in the middle there. Be there for a little bit. Enjoy lunch. I hope you found this useful.
If anyone has questions, I have a microphone. I'm happy to provide it for any immediate questions. Otherwise, I have a question. You spoke about the changing landscape, the changing landscape in threats in the last 5 years. And you have a unique visibility and perspective because you manage a SOC for 1,000+ enterprises. Can you give us a glimpse of the recent trends in threats, whether it's BEC, whaling, ransomware, cryptoman, and then if you can put your hands on the magic ball and if you can make any predictions of what would you expect that to change over the next 12 months, what would you be able to comment to that?
So I think the biggest thing I get that I see it's sort of how can I say this? There's more attacks that we see on a daily basis that don't involve so the more sophisticated attacks don't seem to involve malware per se. So we're coming in with click this fish and so on. We're seeing a lot of pivoting through so a process injection and using the tools that are currently installed on people's systems. The stupider things that we see have to do with gaps in cloud infrastructure. So I've seen cases where a firm put together a 2FA implementation, but had not mandated it. And so what happened, and what the attacker was able to do was go in and find somebody who would be willing to that had a high place in the company, and they had not implemented 2FA, although it was available, and it was self-subscribed. So they got a cell phone, self-subscribed as per that person, got connected in, and for all intents and purposes, they were that person. So much, I'm seeing just using the tools that are existing there, and it's not a tight implementation as well. So that's that gap on that. I was like, yes, we have 2FA. You can check that off when there's due diligence reports, but it was not tightly implemented. I found that there's, especially in that kind of thing, that the more senior people in the firm are usually more loath to change things like this. So and they're the ones that are mostly in the spotlight as well. So, I said, even 10 years ago, if you wanted to write malicious code, you had to know how to program. You had to understand your target. Now that it's just a couple of euro a day and someone else will write it for you, this isn't going to go away. And that's as for the future, I just think we're going to have more difficulty with visibility, and that's my big concern. So how can we get visibility onto mobile devices? And we can't get the same visibility that we'd like to in current infrastructure, but we've got to figure out some way to get better visibility into it.
Thank you very much for those insights.
Thank you.
We are at the end of the time. Please help me thank you, our speakers, Eldon.